stand by. We'll start rolling. Be back with you. Here we go. You're on.
All right. Some of the best stories that we love to watch in movies are the ones when all the odds seem against the good guys, when everything is turning against, when the circumstances seem terrible, when there seems like there's not even a glimmer of hope, and suddenly still they come through. Even girls love the love story when Prince Charming runs. He's absolutely perfect and comes in and finds this girl that's maybe not much going on for her and still rescues her out of that. We love the sports games when that little guy goes all the way through March Madness and upsets all the champions. We love those stories. But yet when it comes to our own lives and we find ourselves against unbearable circumstances, it seems like everything is just going against us. And we just ask, why, God, how could you be doing this? When we're in the midst of that, we don't understand what's going on, and we don't trust Him. And in Judges 3:2, we find that Israel is in a very similar situation, that all these things are going against them, and they find themselves in the same place of just wondering, why, God? Why are you treating us this way? And so as we look at the passage this afternoon, we just want to look at two truths concerning God's treatment of Israel. And the first truth is the purpose for the treatment. And as we read the passage, it says, it was only in order that the generations of the people of Israel might know war, to teach war to those who had not known it before. A quick background of what's been going on. This is right after Joshua has just died. The Israelites have gone through the promised land. They've finally been entering it, and they're conquering city after city after city. They've killed 30-plus kings. All these great miracles have gone on. The sun has stood still. God has shown up time and time and time again. But still, there's work left to be done. And in the midst of all this just great things that are going on, Joshua dies. And Israel finds himself surrounded by just huge nations, from the Philistines to the Canaanites and just all these other people that are just around them. And their great leaders gone. And now they're all broken up into their tribes. And they're scared. And we see that there was a purpose here. It wasn't just that God just kind of sat back and went, oh, shoot, I can't believe Joshua died on me. What's going on? No, what we find in the verse before and the verse after, and the it that God is referring to is this Hebrew word for testing. And the word here refers to the connotations of testing someone to see what they're made of. And it generally involves difficulty or hardship. In fact, the same word is the word that God used for Abraham when it says that He tested him. And this is what God's doing. He didn't just let all these things come up for Israel just for fun, just to see what would happen. He had a purpose behind it. He wanted to see what they were made of. And this was their chance to prove their faithfulness. This wasn't something that just kind of passively happened. God actively allowed this. He had a plan in motion. He knew what He was doing. And He just wanted to see if His people would trust Him. If even when everything seemed dire, if even when there was all these nations that were against them, even when it seems like they've been having this touchdown drive and everything's great, and then Joshua leaves them, if they would continue to pursue Him, that in the midst of all of these great nations, of all these strong nations, that they would believe and they would trust what He said, that they were His people, that He had chosen them, and that they would just set themselves apart. And so that was the purpose here. God had the purpose, and the purpose was because He wanted to test them. And coming in the next point, the next truth, is the need for the treatment. It's the need for the treatment. God had the purpose, and He wanted to do that, but there was a need for it. There really was. And we look, and it says the generations of the people of Israel. Generations, it's something that we're very familiar with throughout in Scripture. The book of Genesis is called Genesis because it's about generation of people and another generation of people. We read all throughout the Bible of all these different generations of those who had faith. But what I found really interesting here is that it says generations. It's plural. It's not just one generation. It's all of the people that God wanted to speak to. He didn't just want to talk to one generation so then they can rise up and they can trust Him and then they can kind of fall away and then He has to go on to the next one. No, this testing was for the entire group. It was the whole nation. And we have the gift of hindsight and knowing what ends up happening in Judges is the people of Israel, one generation trust God and then they die and then the next people forget and do what they want. And they do go through this kind of endless, seemingly hopeless cycle. But what we see here is that's not what God really wanted. He wanted all of them to be tested. He wanted all of them to be proved. And when it talks about that Israel might know war because they hadn't before, what this is referring to is that these people hadn't experienced the kind of faith that their parents had. Their parents, their grandparents had fought with Joshua. They had gone through the battles. They had gotten out of Egypt. They had came into the promised land. Their parents had done all these things, but they had. It wasn't their faith. It wasn't their trusting in God. It was like today, most college students, not typically here at Liberty, although there's quite a few of them, people who run in and, you know, their dad's a pastor, their parents were usually religious, so they just kind of go with that, and then they get to a big secular college and get hit in the face like, oh, whoa, this is kind of different. This is the kind of similar situation that Israel finds himself in, is that now their faith is going to get tested. Now they're going to find out what they're really made of, and this is something that needed to happen. It was something that was needed because God wanted to know whether or not they were going to trust him. It didn't matter that their parents did. He needed to know if they would. And the implication with war, it isn't just because God wanted to just teach them how to fight, because, you know, it seems like a useful thing around then to be able to beat up on other nations and build effective armies and all this kind of stuff. No, the implication is that it's through the experience. This is how the previous generations had learned to trust God, was through those hardships. I know for me personally, when I'm going through hard things, when it seems, you know, friends die, when things hit your family, when those hard situations come, those are the times that you can trust God. Those are the times when you trust. Those are the times when your faith gets real, when it gets refined. And that's what God wanted to teach his people. He wanted to teach them how to be dependent on him. And that was the way he had done it before. And this was their chance. It wasn't just a fight. It wasn't just so that they could watch their loved ones die. It was so that they could go against these impossible odds, that they could choose to trust God, and that he could come through for them. They had to learn to be dependent on God, because dependence and obedience are one of the two most important themes throughout Scripture. It doesn't matter if you stand up and say, oh, I believe because my parents believed. It didn't matter if Israel was like, okay, God, you know, yeah, our parents trusted you, so we'll go along with this. They had to make their own decision in this time. So in conclusion, what God had done here, when he had let all these things happen, when he had let it seem like Israel was just about to be wiped off the face of the map, he made the decision to do this because he had a plan, because there was a need for it, because he wanted to teach his children to obey him. He wanted to teach them to be dependent on him. He wanted to give them this chance, and there was a reason behind this. Just like Abraham was asked to leave, just like Moses was asked to go before Pharaoh, like Jonah was asked to go and preach, like all the prophets, almost every example of person you'll hear in Scripture had a moment where they had this testing, where they had to make a decision of whether or not they were going to obey, whether or not they were going to trust. And so what we need to understand in our own lives is when these hard things come like they came against Israel, we need to understand that God has a purpose for it, that he is in control, that he knows what's going on. And even when they come, we need to make the decision to obey and to trust him. Thank you.
Okay, David, total time is